I watched in horror as the police cars pulled into my driveway. Karen stood on my front porch, tears streaming down her face, pointing directly at me like I was some kind of criminal. Her voice cracked as she told the officers that I was harassing her and trespassing on community property. Community property. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. The lake behind her sparkled in the afternoon sun. The same lake where my grandfather taught me to fish 50 years ago. The same lake where my children took their first swimming lessons. The same private lake that sat on my family's land for 3 generations. But according to Karen, it now belonged to the HOA. According to Karen, she had already gifted lake access to her fiancé as an engagement present. As the officers approached me with their hands on their belts, I realized something that would change everything. Karen had no idea what she had just started. For 37 years, I lived in paradise. My ranch property stretched across 43 acres of rolling hills and meadows, crowned by the most beautiful private lake you could imagine. The water was so clear you could see the bottom 20 feet down. Bass and bluegill swam in lazy circles around the old wooden dock my grandfather built with his own hands back in 1967. Every weekend, my family gathered at that lake. My kids learned to swim in those gentle waters. My wife and I shared countless sunsets from the shore, watching the sky turn pink and orange as the day melted away. The sound of laughter echoed across the water as grandchildren splashed and played, just like I had done decades before. This was not just property to me. This was home. This was legacy. This was everything my grandparents worked for when they bought this land with their life savings and built our family's future one fence post at a time. Then Karen moved in. The Willowbrook HOA development went up on the land adjacent to my property 3 years ago. Neat rows of identical houses with perfect lawns and matching mailboxes. Most of the new neighbors were friendly enough. They waved when they drove by. Some even complimented the lake when they could see it from the road. But Karen was different from the moment she stepped out of her luxury sedan. She was tall and sharp-featured, with blonde hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. Everything about her screamed money and authority. Her fiancé, Richard, was some kind of real estate developer who wore expensive suits even on weekends. They moved into the biggest house in the development, the one with the circular driveway and the 3-car garage. Within a week, Karen knocked on my door. "Hi there," she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am Karen Mitchell. I just moved in next door. I wanted to talk to you about some concerns." I invited her in for coffee, thinking she wanted to introduce herself properly. Instead, she walked straight to my back window and stared out at the lake. "That is quite a view," she said. "It is such a shame that the property maintenance out there is so poor." I followed her gaze, confused. The lake looked perfect to me. The grass was trimmed. The dock was in good repair. Everything was exactly as it should be. "I am sorry, what maintenance issues are you seeing?" I asked. Karen turned back to me with that cold smile. "Well, for starters, that old dock is an eyesore, and the shoreline is completely overgrown. It really brings down the neighborhood standards, do you not think?" My blood began to simmer. This woman had been in the neighborhood for exactly 7 days, and she was already criticizing my family's property. "The dock is in perfect condition," I said calmly, "and the shoreline is natural. It has looked like that for 50 years. Karen said, walking closer to the window. "You know, I sit on the HOA board now. We take neighborhood appearance very seriously. I am sure we can work something out." Over the next few weeks, Karen made it clear what she really wanted. She started showing up at the lake uninvited, always with some excuse about checking the property line, or ensuring community standards. She would stand at the edge of my land and stare at the water like she was measuring it. Then came the phone calls. "I was thinking," Karen said during one particularly bold conversation, "that lake is really too beautiful to be enjoyed by just one family. Have you ever considered making it community property? I think the HOA would be very interested in discussing that possibility." I hung up on her. That night, I stood on my dock and watched the stars reflect in the still water. I had no idea that Corinne was just getting started. I had no idea that she had already decided my lake belonged to her. The first time I found strangers swimming in my lake, I thought it was a mistake. I walked outside with my morning coffee and saw two people I had never met doing laps between my dock and the far shore. They had towels spread on my beach and a cooler sitting on my grass. "Excuse me," I called out. "This is private property." One of them, a middle-aged man with a beer belly, waved at me cheerfully. "Oh, hi there. Corinne said it was okay. We are friends of hers from the HOA." My hands shook as I set down my coffee cup. "Corinne does not have permission to give anyone access to my property." The man looked confused, but she said the lake access was part of the community amenities now. She even gave us a key to the gate. I looked toward my property entrance and felt my stomach drop. Corinne had somehow gotten a copy of my gate key. "This is my private lake on my private property," I said firmly. "I need you to leave immediately." The swimmers gathered their things, apologizing and looking embarrassed. But the damage was done. Corinne had crossed a line I never imagined anyone would dare cross. I called her immediately. "Corinne, you gave strangers access to my property without permission. How did you get a key to my gate?" Her voice was sickeningly sweet. "Oh, do not worry about that. Richard knows a locksmith. We just wanted to make sure the community could enjoy the amenities." "What amenities? This is my land." "Well," Corinne said with a little laugh, "we will see about that." The incidents escalated quickly after that. Every weekend brought new violations. Corinne would show up with different groups of people, treating my lakefront like her personal resort. They left beer bottles floating in the water. They drove across my carefully maintained grass, leaving deep tire tracks. They built illegal fire pits and left them full of ash and debris. I tried reasoning with her first. I wrote polite letters explaining property boundaries. I spoke to her face to face, maintaining my composure even when she interrupted me and rolled her eyes. I even offered to let her use the lake occasionally if she would just ask permission first. Corinne laughed at every attempt at compromise. "You know," she said during one particularly tense conversation, "I have connections at City Hall. My fiancé does business with half the council members. It would be very easy to make life difficult for someone who is not being neighborly." The threat was clear and terrifying. Corinne was not just entitled, she was connected. Within days, I received my first official complaint. The HOA had filed a violation notice against my property for failure to maintain community standards. The specific complaint was about my dock being structurally unsafe and my shoreline being environmentally hazardous. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. My dock had been inspected by professionals just 6 months earlier. My shoreline was completely natural, exactly as it had been for decades. But Corinne was not finished. The next violation claimed my lake created public safety concerns because it was unregulated and potentially dangerous for community members. The letter demanded I either fence off the entire lake or allow it to be managed by the HOA for proper community oversight. I realized with growing horror that Karen was not just harassing me. She was building a legal case to take my property. The final straw came on a Saturday morning in late spring. I was working in my garden when I heard voices and laughter from the lake. I walked over to find Corinne and Richard having what looked like a romantic picnic on my dock. "What are you doing?" I demanded. Corinne looked up at me with that infuriating smile. "Oh, hi there. I was just showing Richard his engagement present." My blood ran cold. "What did you say?" "Well," Corinne said, standing up and smoothing her dress, "I decided to gift Richard lake access as part of our engagement celebration. Is that not romantic? He has always dreamed of having waterfront property." Richard raised his champagne glass in my direction. "Thanks for sharing, neighbor. This is going to be perfect for our wedding photos." I stood there speechless as they continued their picnic on my dock, on my property, celebrating their engagement with my lake as their backdrop. That night, I could not sleep. I walked out to the shore and stared at the water where my grandfather had taught me to cast a fishing line. The same water where my father had proposed to my mother. The same water that was supposed to belong to my children and their children after them. Corinne had declared war on my family legacy. She thought she could steal it with paperwork and connections and sheer audacity. She had no idea how wrong she was. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Official letterhead from the Environmental Protection Agency. My hands trembled as I read the words "immediate compliance required" and "potential environmental violations." According to the complaint, my private lake posed significant ecological risks to the surrounding area. The report claimed I was operating an unpermitted water feature that could contaminate local groundwater. I had 30 days to respond with detailed environmental impact studies or face serious fines. I called the EPA office immediately. "Sir, we received multiple reports about your property," the agent explained. "The complaints allege that your lake is causing drainage problems and potentially harboring dangerous bacteria." "This lake has been here for over 50 years," I said. "It has never caused any problems." "That may be true, but we have to investigate every complaint. You will need to hire a certified environmental consultant to conduct water quality testing. The full assessment will probably cost around $15,000. I hung up the phone feeling sick to my stomach. $15,000 to prove my lake was safe, when I knew Corinne had filed a completely false report. But that was just the beginning. The next day brought a letter from the County Code Enforcement Office. Someone had reported my dock as a dangerous structure that violated local building codes. I needed to provide original construction permits from 1967 or tear it down immediately. Finding 50-year-old permits for a dock my grandfather built by hand seemed impossible. The county clerk searched their records but came up empty. Without documentation, I would have to demolish the dock and pay for a new environmental impact study before rebuilding. Another $10,000. Then came the health department notice. My lake allegedly posed public health risks due to uncontrolled access and lack of safety measures. I needed to install fencing, warning signs, and safety equipment, or face daily fines starting at $500. I was drowning in bureaucratic quicksand, and every move I made seemed to drag me deeper. The most insulting blow came in the form of an official letter from Richard's real estate company. He was generously offering to purchase my lake and the surrounding 2 acres for the incredibly low price of $50,000. The letter explained that this would resolve all regulatory issues and allow me to avoid further legal complications. $50,000 for property worth at least $500,000. I called my lawyer immediately. "This looks like a coordinated harassment campaign," he said after reviewing all the paperwork. "Someone with connections is using multiple agencies to pressure you into selling, but proving it will be expensive and time-consuming." The legal fees were already mounting. Environmental consultants, permit researchers, compliance experts. I was spending thousands of dollars every week just to defend my right to own property my family had possessed for decades. Meanwhile, Karen walked around the neighborhood like a queen surveying her kingdom. She held court at HOA meetings, explaining to anyone who would listen how she was working to resolve the environmental crisis caused by my irresponsible property management. The HOA board, now dominated by Karen and her allies, called an emergency meeting to discuss special assessments for properties that created community liabilities. The proposed fee structure would charge me an additional $3,000 monthly until all environmental and safety issues were resolved. Karen smiled sweetly as she read the proposal aloud. "We simply cannot allow one property owner to endanger the entire community. This assessment will ensure proper oversight." I sat in that meeting room surrounded by neighbors who had been turned against me by Karen's lies and manipulation. These were people I had known for years, but now they looked at me like I was some kind of environmental criminal. After the meeting, Karen approached me in the parking lot. "You know," she said casually, "Richard really loves that lake, and I love Richard. This could all go away very easily if you would just be reasonable." She was not even pretending anymore. This was extortion, plain and simple. That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by legal documents and government notices, calculating how much money I had already spent defending myself against lies. The number was staggering. At this rate, I would be bankrupt within 6 months. But as I stared out at my lake, watching the moonlight dance on the water, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. I met with attorney Sarah Chen on a cold morning in October. Her office walls were lined with law books and framed certificates, but what impressed me most was the fire in her eyes when I told her my story. "This is not your typical neighbor dispute," she said after reviewing my documents. "This is systematic property theft using government agencies as weapons. We need to treat it like the organized crime it actually is." Sarah specialized in property rights cases, and she had seen similar scams before. Her first recommendation was to hire a private investigator. "If Karen has done this once, she has probably done it before," Sarah explained. "We need to find her previous victims and document her pattern of behavior." Within a week, I was working with Detective Mike Rodriguez, a retired police officer who now investigated civil cases. Mike was methodical and thorough, treating my case like a major fraud investigation. "The first thing we do is document everything," Mike said as he set up cameras around my property. "Every trespass, every violation, every lie. We need video evidence of what she is really doing." The cameras captured more than I ever expected. Karen was not just bringing friends to my lake anymore. She was charging people for access. I watched in amazement as cars pulled up to my gate and handed Karen cash before she let them onto my property with her copied key. She was literally running a business using my land. But the real breakthrough came when Mike started investigating Karen's background. What he found was shocking. "Your neighbor is not who she claims to be," Mike told me during our third meeting. Her real name is Kathleen Marie Davidson. She has lived in 6 different states over the past 15 years, and in every location, she has been involved in property disputes with neighbors. The pattern was always the same. Corinne would move into an expensive neighborhood, target a property owner with valuable land or amenities, then use legal harassment and government complaints to force them into selling at below-market prices. She had successfully stolen 2 properties in Colorado, 1 in Arizona, and had pending lawsuits in Nevada and California. She is a professional property predator, Mike explained, and her fiancé Richard is her business partner. They flip the stolen properties for massive profits. Mike showed me deed records proving that Richard had purchased a lakefront property in Colorado for $60,000 after Corinne's harassment campaign forced the previous owner into bankruptcy. That same property sold 2 years later for $1.2 million. But the most damning evidence came from Mike's investigation into the government complaints against my property. Using his law enforcement contacts, he discovered that Corinne had submitted falsified photographs and forged documents to multiple agencies. The environmental report she filed with the EPA included pictures of a completely different lake, one that actually was contaminated and dangerous. The building code violations were based on made-up inspection reports that had never been officially filed. The health department complaint included testimonies from people who had never even visited my property. She committed multiple felonies, Mike said. Fraud, forgery, filing false police reports, conspiracy. We have enough evidence to put her in prison. Meanwhile, Sarah was building our civil case. She found the previous property owners Corinne had victimized and convinced 3 of them to join our lawsuit. Their stories were heartbreakingly similar to mine. Elderly couples forced from homes they had owned for decades. Young families bankrupted by legal fees defending against false accusations. Corinne and Richard have stolen over $4 million worth of property, Sarah calculated, and they left a trail of broken lives behind them. We also discovered that several HOA board members had received financial incentives from Richard's company. The emergency assessments against my property were not legitimate community decisions. They were part of the organized campaign to force me into selling. As our evidence file grew thicker, I felt a strange sense of calm replacing the months of fear and anxiety. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was not reacting to Corinne's attacks. I was preparing to destroy her. Mike installed additional surveillance equipment and began coordinating with law enforcement. Sarah prepared a massive lawsuit that would not only seek financial damages, but also criminal prosecution for everyone involved in the conspiracy. We are not just going to beat them, Sarah told me with a fierce smile. We are going to make sure they never do this to anyone else again. The trap was set. Corinne had no idea that her entire criminal enterprise was about to collapse around her. She was still showing up at my lake, still collecting money from trespassers, still believing that her lies and connections made her untouchable. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The call came at 7 in the morning on a Saturday. Corinne's voice was shrill and panicked. "I am calling the police right now. You are harassing me and trespassing on community property. This ends today." I hung up and looked out my window. Corinne was standing at the edge of my property line, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly toward my house. She had brought Richard and 2 other people I did not recognize, probably as witnesses to whatever performance she was planning. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled into my driveway. My heart pounded as the officers approached. Everything we had worked for came down to this moment. If Corinne's connections were as strong as she claimed, if her lies were convincing enough, I could end up in handcuffs instead of her. Officer Martinez was young and serious-looking. Officer Thompson was older, with tired eyes that suggested he had seen every kind of neighborhood dispute imaginable. Corinne immediately rushed toward them, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God you are here," she sobbed. "He has been harassing me for months. He threatened me yesterday, and now he is trespassing on our community lake." I watched from my porch as Corinne put on the performance of her life. She pointed at my house like it was a fortress of evil. She gestured toward the lake like it was a sacred community treasure being defiled by my presence. She even managed to make her voice shake with fear. "He said he was going to make me pay," Corinne told the officers. "I am scared for my safety, and he keeps using our lake without permission from the HOA." Officer Martinez looked skeptical. "Ma'am, whose property is the lake actually on?" "It is community property now," Corinne said firmly. "The HOA has taken over management due to environmental and safety concerns." I took a deep breath and walked toward the officers. This was the moment of truth. "Officers, I am glad you are here," I said calmly. "I have some documents you need to see." I handed Officer Thompson a folder containing my property deed, survey maps, and tax records. Everything clearly showed that the lake and surrounding land belonged to me and had belonged to my family for over 50 years. "This property has been in my family since 1967, I explained. "The lake is entirely within my property boundaries. No HOA has any authority over it." Corinne's face went pale as Officer Thompson studied the documents. But the environmental reports," she stammered. "The safety violations, the community voted." "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said patiently, "the community cannot vote to take someone's private property. That is not how property ownership works." I handed the officers a second folder. This one contained photographs of Corinne trespassing on my property, copies of her fraudulent government reports, and evidence of her charging people for access to my land. "This woman has been running an illegal business on my property," I said. "She has been charging people money to use my lake without my permission." Officer Thompson's tired eyes suddenly became very alert. "Sir, do you have proof of this?" I pulled out my phone and showed them video footage from Mike's surveillance cameras. Clear images of Corinne taking money from strangers and leading them onto my property. Corinne's voice could be heard clearly on the audio, advertising exclusive lake access for $30 per person. Corinne's confident demeanor crumbled before my eyes. That is not. You do not understand." "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, his tone now completely different. "It appears you have been operating a business on someone else's property without permission. That is criminal trespass at minimum." But I was not finished. I handed the officers a third folder containing Mike's investigation into Corinne's background and criminal history, her real name, her previous scams, the pattern of property theft that had destroyed multiple families across 6 states. Officer Thompson read through the documents with growing amazement. "Ma'am, are you Kathleen Marie Davidson, also known as Corinne Mitchell?" Corinne looked around desperately. Richard had already started backing toward his car. The other witnesses were staring at her with shock and disgust. "I want to speak to my lawyer," Corinne said weakly. "That is probably a good idea," Officer Martinez replied, "because based on what we are seeing here, you are looking at multiple felony charges." The crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch the confrontation began murmuring as the reality of the situation became clear. These were the same people who had believed Corinne's lies about me. Now they were seeing the truth in real time. Corinne's mask finally slipped completely. The sweet, concerned neighbor disappeared, replaced by something ugly and desperate. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," she screamed at me. "I have connections, I have money, I will destroy you, I will make sure you lose everything." Officer Thompson shook his head sadly. "Ma'am, you are making threats in front of police officers. I strongly advise you to stop talking." But Corinne could not stop. Months of lies and manipulation were collapsing around her, and she was spiraling out of control. "This is not over," she shrieked as Officer Martinez guided her toward the patrol car. "I will make you pay for this. You will regret the day you ever met me." As the police car drove away with Corinne in the back seat, I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction that I had never experienced before. The nightmare was finally ending. But Corinne's threats still echoed in my ears. She was right about one thing. This was not over yet. The lawsuit we filed against Corinne, Richard, and the corrupted HOA board members was massive. Sarah had assembled a legal team that treated the case like a major organized crime prosecution. "We are seeking damages for fraud, conspiracy, harassment, trespass, theft of services, filing false reports, and intentional infliction of emotional distress," Sarah explained as she prepared the paperwork. "The total claim is for $4.2 million in damages and punitive awards." Corinne tried to make the case disappear before it ever reached court. Her lawyer called Sarah within days of the filing, offering to settle for a reasonable amount if we would agree to keep the case private. "They want to pay you $50,000 and make this go away quietly," Sarah told me. "They are terrified of a public trial." I did not hesitate. No deal. I want everyone to see exactly what they did. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was devastating for Corinne's defense. Under court order, she had to produce documents, emails, and financial records that revealed the full scope of her criminal enterprise. We discovered that Corinne and Richard had created fake environmental testing companies to file fraudulent reports with government agencies. They had forged inspection documents using stolen official letterheads. They had bribed 2 HOA board members with promises of discounted properties once they successfully seized my land. Most shocking of all, we found detailed plans for their next targets. Corinne had already identified 6 other properties in the area that she wanted to steal using the same tactics she had used against me. "This was not a crime of opportunity," Sarah explained to the judge during pretrial hearings. "This was a calculated business model designed to systematically steal valuable property from innocent families." The witness testimonies during the trial were heartbreaking and powerful. Margaret Patterson, an elderly widow from Colorado, described how Corinne's harassment campaign had forced her to sell her family ranch for a fraction of its value. She had lost the home where she raised 5 children and buried her husband. "I trusted her," Margaret said through tears. "She seemed so nice at first, so concerned about the neighborhood. I had no idea she was planning to steal everything I had left." James and Linda Rodriguez from Arizona told the court how Corinne had destroyed their small business by filing false health department complaints that shut them down for months. By the time they proved the reports were fraudulent, they had lost their customers and gone bankrupt. "She did not just steal our property," Linda testified. "She stole our future, our retirement, our children's inheritance. She destroyed our lives for money." But the most damaging testimony came from Corinne herself. Under oath, she was forced to admit to forging documents, filing false reports, and running an illegal business on my property. Her lawyer tried to portray her as a confused woman who had made honest mistakes, but the evidence was overwhelming. When Sarah played the surveillance video of Corinne charging people for access to my lake, the courtroom was completely silent. You could see Corinne on the screen, clearly and methodically collecting money from strangers before letting them onto property she knew did not belong to her. "Ms. Davidson," Sarah said during cross-examination, "how much money did you collect from people who paid to use Mr. Johnson's private lake?" Corinne squirmed in her chair. "I do not remember exactly." "According to your own financial records, which we subpoenaed from your bank, you collected over $12,000 over a 6-month period. Is that correct?" It was not about the money." "Then why did you charge them? Why not let them use the lake for free if you genuinely believed it was community property?" Corinne had no answer. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They found Corinne and Richard guilty on all counts and awarded me $3.1 million in damages. The judge added another $900,000 in punitive awards, calling their behavior a calculated assault on property rights and community trust. But the financial judgment was only part of the victory. Corinne was also facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and filing false police reports. Richard was under investigation by the state attorney general for real estate fraud. 2 HOA board members had already resigned in disgrace. As we left the courthouse, Sarah smiled and shook my hand. "Congratulations," she said. "You did not just win your case. You protected everyone else they were planning to target." I looked back at the courthouse steps where Corinne and Richard stood with their lawyers, looking defeated and desperate. The woman who had once threatened to destroy my life was now facing bankruptcy and possible prison time. Justice had been served, but the best part was still to come. $3,100,000. That was the final settlement amount after Corinne's insurance company and Richard's business assets were liquidated to pay the judgment. The additional $900,000 in punitive damages came directly from their personal accounts. Corinne had to sell her house in the Willowbrook development to help cover the debt. The same house she had bought to be closer to my lake was now gone, along with her luxury cars, jewelry, and vacation properties in 3 states. Richard fared even worse. The state attorney general's investigation revealed that his real estate company had been involved in similar property theft schemes for over a decade. He lost his business license, faced federal fraud charges, and ended up declaring bankruptcy. The engagement to Corinne did not survive the legal consequences of their crimes. I used part of the settlement money to upgrade my property security. New fencing, electronic gates, and a state-of-the-art surveillance system ensure that no one will ever trespass on my land again. I also hired a landscaping company to restore all the damage Corinne and her customers had caused to my shoreline. But the most satisfying improvement was the new dock. I had the old one carefully restored to exactly match my grandfather's original design, then added a beautiful gazebo where my family can sit and watch the sunset over the water that belongs to us. The lake has never looked more beautiful. The community changes were just as rewarding as the personal ones. Corinne's removal from the HOA board led to a complete restructuring of the organization. New leadership focused on actual community concerns rather than personal vendettas. The special assessments against my property were immediately canceled, and the HOA formally apologized for their role in Corinne's harassment campaign. Several neighbors approached me privately to apologize for believing Corinne's lies. They had been manipulated just like everyone else, and they felt terrible about turning against me without hearing my side of the story. "We should have known better," said Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down. "You have been a good neighbor for decades. We let a stranger turn us against you." I forgave them all. Karen was a professional manipulator who had fooled people across 6 states. My neighbors were just her latest victims. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the legal defense fund I established with part of the settlement money. Working with Sarah, I created a foundation to help other property owners who face similar harassment campaigns. We provide free legal advice, connect victims with experienced attorneys, and help document evidence against property predators. In the first year alone, we helped 12 families fight back against fraudulent complaints and harassment schemes. 3 of those cases resulted in criminal prosecutions of the perpetrators. Karen's playbook is now being used to identify and stop other property theft operations across the country. Margaret Patterson, the elderly widow from Colorado who testified at Karen's trial, was one of our first success stories. We helped her sue the people who stole her ranch and recovered enough money for her to buy a beautiful new home near her grandchildren. "You gave me hope again," she told me during a phone call last month. "I thought I would never see justice. Now I have my life back." 6 months after the trial ended, I received a letter from Karen. She was writing from a minimum security prison where she was serving an 18-month sentence for fraud and filing false police reports. The letter was supposed to be an apology, but it read more like a final attempt at manipulation. She claimed she had learned her lesson and hoped we could put this behind us. She even suggested that she might want to make amends by helping other people avoid similar mistakes. I threw the letter away without finishing it. These days, I spend my evenings on the new dock, watching my grandchildren learn to fish in the same waters where my grandfather taught me. The lake reflects the sky like a mirror, peaceful and eternal in hours. Karen thought she could steal my family's legacy with lies and legal tricks. Instead, she gave me something even more valuable. She taught me that fighting for what is right is always worth it, no matter how powerful the enemy seems. The lake still sparkles in the afternoon sunshine, but now it sparkles with the light of justice served.